Yeah.
And then there's a number underneath. This starts a little bit more into the book. We just feel like the first 2 chapters are like, we're going to kind of just briefly gloss over them, not because they're like not good to read, but just because they're like very technical. And so it was like, okay, for like an intro shear, it's like a lot to go into that. We're happy to go more into it, like one-on-one. Just like for an intro shear, we're like, maybe I need to start coming, like we want to go into that, but like it can be a little difficult. So this is the Baal HaSulam right here, everything with this line. The number underneath is from Rebbe Gottlieb, and then all of this is translated into English. The very, very back of this paper, you'll actually find the original Hebrew. So as I like to say it, this is like the Chumash, the Rebbe Shlita is like the Rashi, and this entire work is like the art scroll. It's kind of like to translate into something that a lot of people would like understand. So anything here?
When was the Baal HaSulam? When did he write? How long ago was that?
He wrote, my husband knows the timeline better than I do.
So he wrote most of these essays in the 1930s. The Matan Torah essays were collected during his time in Israel. He immigrated to Israel with his family in the 1920s. He had 11 children who...
Where was Ashlag? That's what I'm trying to picture. Where is it?
Sure. So it's from Poland.
Poland.
Yes. Lodz, Poland to be exact. Yeah.
Does it stand for something? Is it also based on a city, the name Ashlag?
So normally in Chassidus you have... It's named after the city. It's one of the very few that's named after the actual last name of the Admor, of the Rebbe.
Like, same thing. Gua was in Poland. Lubavitch is in Russia.
Yeah, it was named after the city, like South America.
Right, 100%. So even on the front of giving, just translated by a gentleman named Ari Siva, who actually lives in Efrat, but my husband knows very, very well. You'll see on the front, it says Rabbi Yehuda Lev Ashlag, in parentheses, the Baal HaSulam. So that is the founder of our...
So Baal HaSulam is the founder, and his last name was Ashlag, and so this was named the Ashlag Hasidut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ashlag is not a name of a place.
No.
It's the name of the family.
Yes. And as far as the start of any Chassidus, it turns out that like true leaders don't really start it themselves. There's a group of people that surround them and then really force them into the role. So he had no intention in his humility to ever be a leader or be a Rebbe of anyone. But the people that surrounded him at some point asked him, apparently there's some halachic document that people can write and force someone into the role of Rebbe, like into Admor. So they did that with him. And he was put into this position. They made him into the Ashlag Rebbe, so to speak.
It's like a halachic tag, you're it, as I like to say. Like, you're in charge of us now.
Yes.
And it only started in the 1930s?
So he was born in 1886. Okay. He was, it's said that he knew Torah Kula by the age of 14. He, in yeshiva, when he had a Gemara in hand, he had the Arizal's Eitz Chaim ripped out inside his Talmud, and he would flip the page when his Rebbes would walk by. He was a Dayan by the age of 19.
Oh, wow.
And he was one of the most respected rabbis in that town. Then at some point, he figured he had a sense that Europe wouldn't be the greatest place to live come 10, 20 years. And he left as quickly as he could after he realized such a thing. And he tried to let other people know that it wasn't such a great place to be and that there was going to be some unfortunate events coming.
What year was that?
This was in 1924. And no one listened, unfortunately. So he came with 8 kids. Then after 2 years, they came back to Israel to try to get the remaining 3 children. Unfortunately, 2 of them had passed. And they got the remaining child, the 9th one, and brought them back to Israel.
So he went from Poland to Israel. He didn't go to the States.
No.
Okay.
Right, which I think is very much reflected like in the Kehillah today. A lot of members of our Kehillah are like very Israeli and have a very like Israeli or like even like a very Yiddish vibe. Like there are some members who speak Yiddish quite fluently, including the Rebbe himself, Rebbe Gottlieb. But I think now, especially as more and more people are kind of coming into this, like from different backgrounds, the Rebbe's like, wait a second, we need shiurim in Russian, in French, in English, in different languages. And he specifically asked, like the Rebbe asked us, because we're native English speakers, like we're all from the old country, as I call it, from America. So he wants us to kind of teach our mother, like in our mother tongue to other people, because he knows the value of that. So that's
And you moved to Telstone because of Ashlag?
So because my husband was very, very close to the Rebbe here, and I knew that he needed to just like be here, and was like total siyata d'shmaya that we found an apartment like 3 doors down from the shul, like 2.5 weeks before the second Corona lockdown. It's like so crazy because it's hard to find an apartment in Telstone. It's really hard. Really, really hard. So
I moved in a day before the Erev Shabbat, before Rosh Hashanah. And right after that, my program in yeshiva went into bidud. And
so you didn't have to go into bidud because you were out.
I came here, yeah. It was like, Mom, was perfect timing.
Right.
Yeah.
And had he stayed there, we would have had to change our wedding date too. It would have been really
Also.
Yeah, it was crazy because they got out of bidud like right, like the day after our wedding, 2 days after our wedding, something like that.
Not sure.
Like around the time, like after, but still would have conflicted. So it was like so crazy. My husband has a very interesting story as to how he kind of like got connected to the learning and whatnot. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to come and like give just like a class and listen. Since there's like the two of you here, it could be a little bit more like conversational.
Yeah.
I think. Like we can also do a recording later. Like it's really fine. Again, we live 3 doors down,
Okay.
so it's not hard for us to like pop in.
I started the recording.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, Shalom.
I mean, this is very formal. We're having a conversation. It's fine.
Right.
It's all good.
Right. So yeah, do you guys have any other questions before my husband kind of goes? I don't know if you want to talk more about the Baal HaSulam and about.
Well, that's kind of how we wanted to intro it, to just give some background on the Torah and the Baal HaSulam and what it's become today. So when he came to Israel, he wanted to be.
You were already connected to Ashlag when you came to Israel?
When I came to Israel, I came specifically to come to yeshiva, and I came into yeshiva already with like a Ashlag hashkafa, even as a secular Jew.
How'd you hear about it?
So,
I never heard of Ashlag in America.
so interestingly, there's many branches of Ashlag. Some of them have taken a not so halachic route. So if you've heard of the Kabbalah Center, for example,
In LA.
Yeah.
the likes of Madonna and other celebrities,
Right.
that's actually Ashlag. It's a watered down Ashlag.
Yeah.
The Baal HaSulam had 2 top students. His first son was Rabbi Baruch Shalom. That's the Rebbe Zitzal. Rabbi Gottlieb here was the top student and his successor. The other top student was Rabbi Brandwein. Rabbi Brandwein had multiple branches from him. The kibbutz up north, Organuz, if you know the wine.
Oreganus from the
What?
The wine Organuz.
Oreganus. Yeah, you'll see it in the Margalit here.
I
Oreganus.
thought that was Breslov.
It's actually Ashlag.
What?
It's actually Ashlag.
It's actually us.
Really?
Surprise! So exciting.
The kibbutz up north, Organuz, is about 550, 600 people, and their whole kibbutz is based off of the Baal HaSulam's philosophy of altruism, giving, trying to give as much as you can, take as least as you can.
Wow. That's Rav Ashlag or no?
Yes.
So he's also Ashlag?
Yeah.
He's a,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They don't mention like the name isn't. Is it like supposed to be hidden?
I don't know.
What's the name?
One of the head rebbeim of Organuz is Harav Asherov, Rav Yuval Asherov.
Like Asher.
Yes. So he knows the Rebbe well. He comes sometimes, and they have meetings about
Here?
the matter.
Comes to tell
He
us
comes to
about
tell. He comes all the way to Telstone, and they meet and speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
Yeah.
So we like to say our cousins up north and our cousins wherever. So yeah.
So he being a student of Rabbi, the name is slipping my mind, but the head of Organus, he's the dean, like director of Organus. He actually lives in Yerushalayim. I think he's in his 90s now. And he was a student of Rabbi Brandwein, who was a student of the Baal HaSulam. And of the students of Rabbi Brandwein, one of them was Berg, who started the Kabbalah Center. And they kind of went into a more business route, universalist, was teaching Jews, non-Jews, and he went into a very new age approach and kind of stripped the Torah and mitzvos and halacha for the most part. So it's kind of the intention here. We want to remind people that there is, authentic sources, authentic Kabbalah. But you've heard of that. So interestingly, that has connection to these types of ideas and these concepts. So there's another organization in Israel, and my father has been a student of this organization for 20 years. So I grew up having also connection with it, even as a secular Jew. And I was reading some of these essays and whatnot, even as a teenager. So I had some type of connection to this learning and this philosophy early on. Never really had the means to jump into it and have the desire to really go in. But after coming to yeshiva and building some connections, I ended up having a Havrus in Sfat. A friend of mine, Avraham Lowenthal, he's a beautiful Kabbalistic artist. He's got a great studio up there. He's also done some translations for Rabbi Gottlieb. And he told me about the community here. So slowly but surely, I started coming for Shabbos every week, and now we're here.
Yeah. So that's kind of the story of how we got here. Yeah, did you guys have any like specific questions about like Ashlag in terms of like we gave you a little bit of the background, but like any reason why you're like curious or like why you wanted to come here now? Like I'm very like curious as to like why you wanted to be here.
I tell you, אנחנו חסידי חב"ד.
Okay, that's like
אנחנו חסידי חב"ד.
you know Neira?
What?
Neira is her name? Neira is a woman in our kahila who has a very close connection to Chabad. She considers herself Chabad, but her husband learns and davens here and is very like Ashlag minded. So I feel like we're cousins.
I told you that
We're another type.
we were in Telstone over 40 years, but there was no such thing as Hasidut in Telstone.
Mm-hmm.
My husband, Shalom, was a student of Rav Yaakov Landa.
Wow.
And he used to learn by Rav Yaakov Landa, who was sent to Israel by the Rasha, the fifth.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And he was the influence on my family. Rav Landa was the influence to connect to Chabad. All my children are Chabadnikim, my daughters are married to Shluchim. Anyway, so I don't know much. My background is a little different, or Valley Chufa, and until we got to Chabad. And so I used to go every Monday to Lachaya. You know, that's the women's school in Gola. But since the corona, I've been chassid on the old shiurei chassidut. So when I heard about the midrasha and this and that, I says, "Well,
Wow.
Nice.
So I started coming, and then I saw this shiur in English. So I said, "Ani
Very nice. Nice to have you.
Yeah. And Amy, for you, if you don't mind sharing, I don't mean to whatever.
So
I feel like we're very friendly, so I'm like the friendly vibe.
Totally fine. So I'm also Baal HaSulam, also from LA.
Ooh.
I wasn't so much connected with the Kabbalah Center.
Mm-hmm.
When I would go to shul, I would pass by there. I don't hear about the red string. I'm curious to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually so tired. It was a very busy day, and I was going to go to sleep. And my husband said, don't forget, you have the shear tonight. I'm like, what shear? What are you talking about? I was like, let me bring the kiloton. Let me show it to you. So he's like, this looks good. It's like, what is this? And it's in English, it's for women, it's like the first one. So I thought, let's give it a try. He was willing to put the kids to bed.
Oh, very nice.
Well,
that was another advantage.
Yeah.
So that's it.
It's worth it. Wow.
Yeah. I will have a lot of questions. And on the nights that I'm more awake, I'll have even more questions.
You'll be. Okay.
Great.
So I think it'd be good for you to talk a little bit more about like how we're a little bit different, like from other, like the Baal HaSulam's, like why he's saying why now, why Panimiyot Torah. Be very good.
So I think just to read the first section, it's actually not printed out there, but just as a quick reference point. It's called The Time to Act. It's how he opened up the essays of Matan Torah. Matan Torah actually is a collection of 12 essays, and it was only compiled after he was nifter. The one we're learning here, Matan Torah, is the most famous of the essays and the most foundational to the Hashkafa. And the Hashkafa basically is that Yiddishkeit is about reaching the state of loving the other. That's really the ultimate spiritual level that we're trying to attain. And the Baal HaSulam tried to hit home the message that this is close to, if not the final generation. And the Mekubalim of the past have all stated that as time continued, the importance of Pnimiyus Torah, the importance of the inner dimensions would increase, and it would be most necessary to be involved in it as we near the final revelation. So Baal HaSulam wrote a commentary on the Zohar, which is what he's named after. His commentary is called the Sulam. He translated every single word of the Zohar into Hebrew, and he also commentated on the entirety of it. And he also organized the entire Sifrei Arizal, which was all jumbled up, because the Arizal wrote very little himself, only a couple songs. Chaim Vital and some of his other students wrote most of it, but it was a very big bilbul. So he organized it and commentated on it. He put questions and answers for every chapter. He made a seder. And he gave us a language that someone seemingly off the street could come to understand these deep concepts slowly but surely.
What language?
It's called the language of root and branch.
Of what?
Root and branch.
No, but
Like
Yiddish,
Hebrew.
It's the language of hiddenness. It's the language of Pnimiyus Torah.
Right, but was he writing in Hebrew or was he writing in Yiddish?
Wait, the Zohar is in Aramaic?
The Zohar is in Aramaic.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then he translated it to Hebrew.
Like modern Hebrew.
Modern Hebrew.
His word is that the Zohar HaKadosh was sealed with 1,000 seals. It is the foundation of Kabbalah as we know it. It is extremely terse and it's not easy to understand. Many by tradition would read and scan the text just knowing and feeling that the text itself was holy, but imagining that this is a sefer for malachim and that humans can't connect to it. So he was not of that opinion. He was the opinion that this is most definitely meant for people. There's a story that when he was 7, a book fell off the shelf in his home and hit his head. He picked it up and started reading it. It happened to be the Zohar. And his father came to him and he took the book from his hand and said, "This is not a book for you, this is a book for angels." And the Baal HaSulam said to him, at 7 years old, he said, "If this book was written, it was written for me. It's written for people. That's why it was written down." So too, we understand that all of our Sifrei Torah were written, all levels of Torah were written for us so that we can connect to it and aim for love and light and connecting to Kodesh Baruch Hu.
So what about the concept of not learning Kabbalah until you get to 40?
Very good question. So the way that is brought down in the Gomorrah, from what I understood even in Yeshiva asking the same question, there's different levels of Kabbalah. Generally 3 levels. The Baal HaSulam himself claimed that everything he revealed is just level 1. So the notion of 40 years old is more like this Merkava type higher understanding. This is perhaps the Kabbalah of the Sefer Yetzirah. By tradition, we hear that Abraham Avinu was able to make cows, and you have these stories of golems. The more maybe magical stuff that's really beyond our understanding, that's perhaps what we understand to be until 40 years old. But in recent generations, we've had great tzaddikim who claim otherwise. For example, Rav Kook says, if someone has the desire to correct themselves, if they're coming into it at least wanting to come to a state of lishma, then it's totally open for them. There's no barriers. Understandably, in the past, there were barriers for good reason, because it wasn't so necessary. In prior generations, you could get refinement through nigle. You could get it on the Gemara, you can get it through the Musar. Those generations were more refined. Chazal gave us the principle that as generations go on, they decrease. So because we become more coarse, because we become more egoistic, so we need a greater light to correct that. It's understood, at least the Baal HaSulam explains, that the Zohar was written specifically for this generation, specifically for the generation before the Mashiach or during the footsteps of Mashiach, because this is the time to reveal such a light and connect. It's a good question, and there's those still to this day of great caliber who are of the opinion that one must go through the breadth of Shas and Poskim before they touch such wisdom. The challenge that we would have for them simply is that, woe to those who could achieve such a thing. My time in Yiddishkeit is also very short, being a Baal Tshuva, but understandably, by the time someone finishes Shas and Poskim, halavai if they get to in their lifetime. So if someone has a desire, if they want to really correct themselves, or if they want to at least learn and see what's in there, have an interest, then seemingly the gates are open for them. And the idea of perhaps Eino Movado, everything's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that this has been revealed, not to say that it's authentic, but if the fact that we can go on Amazon and type in Pnimiyus Torah Kabbalah and thousands of results come up, not to say they're authentic books, but the fact that it's been revealed, there needs to be some type of authentic counteract to this movement. Seemingly, from what I've heard statistically, 90% of Buddhists in America are Jewish. The New Age movement is booming. I myself having been a part of it before Yiddishkeit.
Wait a second. What's the New Age movement? I'm in Israel over 60 years.
It's a good question.
The New Age movement actually is also very big in Israel. A lot of secular Israelis are very into something called Ruchnit Chitzoni Ruchnias. They even call it that. They connect, for example, energies, yoga, crystals, things of Eastern folk or tradition. I heard in yeshiva that this is the stuff that Abraham Avinu gave to his other sons. It says that Abraham Avinu gave his sons gifts and sent them to the east.
Mm-hmm.
So
after the time of Sarah Menu, like when
Right.
he remarries Hagar and has more children with her, the gifts that he gives at the end of, is that Parsha Chaya Sarah or after the next Parsha? I forget. But after that Parsha, that he gives these gifts to people, and it's like, what are these gifts? And the gifts are these little like sparks of the inner parts of Torah, which end up being spread across the world as what we now know today as Buddhism, or just kind of like New Age
Buddhism,
like,
Taoism, all these spiritual groups.
Right.
Whereas he gave Yitzchak Avinu the true tradition, the tradition with a capital T.
Mm-hmm.
He gave him this chokhmah, the true chokhmah, to come to the Vekas. But he gave those sons who didn't have that Jewish aspect, that real Jewish spark in DNA, something. He gave them some type of chokhmah so they can be involved in some type of connection to Ruchnias, but not the means to correct themselves. So as time continues, we see that it's manifesting that interest in spirituality is booming, also in the frum world, we would hope. And it's because that our neshamalas want something more. It's time to connect to something deeper. So, due to this great influence in the rest of the world and society, and due to so many Jews, myself also included in this prior to tshuva, being whipped away by such movements, we want to.
There was definitely a tshuva movement that was very great after the 6-Day War and things, and people who came. But today, when you hear what's going on in America, you don't hear that.
Right.
Today, it's, and he spoke to my one remaining aunt, and she told me her grandson got engaged or something, or granddaughter. And I said, are they Jewish? She says, you don't even ask a question like that. I was like,
Wow.
Wow. His parents would have definitely asked. Right.
It's unfortunate.
That's a very
Even in the Sephardi communities, there used to be a lot more, very strong and like, because in the Middle Eastern countries it was so secular, so segregated from the Muslims. But even now, 2 generations later, and you see like
what I hear, what I
unfortunate.
So deep idea is that the Jewish people are the panemius of the world. We're the nucleus. So if we were to involve ourselves in a balanced diet of Torah, being the body of the Torah and the soul of the Torah, then we're actually nourishing all aspects of the world. When we're supposed to be a light unto the nations, it's quite literally the things that we're involved in ourselves, the type of Torah that we're involved in, and the type of refinement we have, and the love that we're trying to actualize with our relationships. This is what feeds the world. So Rabbi Chaim Vital, the top student of the Arizal, who wrote on the Eitz Chaim, said in his generations, the 16th century, those who are going off the derech is because they're not connecting to Pnimius HaTorah. Their soul is thirsty, and they are not getting it in the dryness of their Yiddishkeit, so they have no choice but to see it elsewhere. Perhaps it relates today, perhaps there's particular cases otherwise.
I think also too, just to kind of add to that point, like something that I think is so amazing to me as I've kind of learned more about like this Hasidut and learning more just about the Baal HaSulam himself and the teachings, is I actually am very much reminded of so many other things that I've learned in my Yiddishkeit journey. And one of them being a very fundamental teaching of the Derech Hashem. It's a classic book that many of us have in our from Jewish libraries. It's like, what are the classic books to have? It's like Mesilas Yesharim, Derech Hashem, just kind of a classic, right? Just like the classic from Jewish home library. And what's interesting is I remember a shir back from my seminary days of how in the beginning of Derech Hashem, the Ramchal, who also is very into Kabbalah, very, very much so. And that was one of the reasons why it's not something we talk about so much, but it's one of the reasons why he was so not liked by people, is because he was integrating Kabbalah in a way that people were like kind of afraid of, but yet it's so intrinsic to a from Jewish library. It's very interesting. That in the Derech Hashem, right, Hashem has a want to make a being in his image, but there's an inherent issue in the actual creation, right? It's that when Hashem wants to make a like being in his image, right? First of all, Hashem had the ability to do so, and he had the free will to do so. And secondly, he's making something in his image, so that created being also has to have the free will to be able to be in Hashem's image as well. So from that, we learn that the purpose of every human being in the world is to do our own personal tikkunim, right? We have to be able to have the choice to have free will, right? We have to have free will in the world in order for us to be able to make the same choice that our Creator made, and for us to be more like Hashem's image, right? And each person in the world has their own spiritual mission in that, right? If you are not Jewish, you have the Noahide laws, which that's the way that, a non-Jew is able to connect to Hashem. And for the Jewish people, we have the whole Torah that we're supposed to keep. And I think that fundamental thing is, not only are we just becoming like Hashem, I think sometimes we take that message of, oh, I'm going to become like Hashem and, be really, really strict in my kashrus and be very, very strict in this area of halacha. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But we forget that one of the key aspects of what Hashem wants to do in the world is he wants to give goodness unto creation, right? And when we kind of ask the question, what is love? It's us being more like our Creator, in that Hashem wants us to receive his light. He wants us to receive his goodness for us to be able to give to other people so that we're also more like Hashem ourselves. And that's kind of the bekitzer of what is love. But how do we do that tangibly is kind of more what we want to explore throughout these classes. And something else I think about too is kind of why us, why now in our generation. And listen, ladies, throughout Jewish history, right, we had Gemara, which was written down. We had Sarah Schneer, who decided to make the Beit Yaakov schools, right? We have had changes within the Jewish world. And something that I always think about when I think about change in the Jewish world and women is actually Sefer Shmuel Aleph with the story of Hana, right? Before we actually talk about Tefillas Hana in Perek Bet, where we have the beautiful tefillah, we actually have the story of Hana beforehand, right? And what happens in that story, right? Her husband, her, co-wife Penina, cannot talk. They're all, able to give sacrifices, be able to give offerings. And Penina's trying to, we all hear these stories so often about how Penina's like nudging her and being kind of like not the nicest to her to try to get her to go daven, right? She really has the good intention of like, Hana, you need to take it on yourself and daven for you to be able to have a child, right? And at one point, her husband even says to her, aren't I as good to you as 10 sons? And in a weird way, a lot of Chazal say that he's kind of telling her like, give up, like, you don't need to daven as hard. And that's the moment where Hana realizes that she needs to daven for a child and take it into her own hands, right? That ladies, we have our own tefillah, we have our own ability to learn Torah, especially in this generation as women, b'derech klal, are learning more Torah than we've ever learned as a gender in our entire history as the Jewish people, which I think is like really cool that we're so zocha to like be in this generation, right? And that we have this beautiful Torah where we're not just like becoming robots to Torah, right? Because sometimes it can look and feel so much like that. I was actually meeting with a friend of mine today, and she was saying that even her, most Litvish Rav, who's very into like having all the nitty gritty of halacha, be very, very into place, is saying, this isn't like the future of the Jewish people, right? And I think when we see that so much of the body of Torah looks so robotic, we're getting exactly the response from the Jewish world that you talk about. It's like of people feeling like, Judaism is just like, I can't like have my phone on Shabbat, and I can't, go and eat this tray food. Like, I want to do what I want, right? Because it's not just about the body of the Torah, right? It's not just about becoming robots and all that somehow makes me a more loving person, right? Some guy could be sitting and learning Gemara all day long. He can be, eating the most kosher food on the planet. It doesn't refine him as a person, right? But we really want to learn. And what even our Rebbe says is that this sefer in particular is more the pnimius of Torah, the inner part of Torah that positively affects us to not just be Hashem's ambassadors in the world of, being the sneeze police all over the place, but, or any other sort of halachic police. But really, we're supposed to be Hashem's light in the world. We're supposed to be showing Hashem's love. We're supposed to be Hashem's ambassadors. And that, especially in this generation, please God, the generation of Mashiach coming very soon, is not just us saying, oh yeah, of course we want Mashiach, but we have to act as if Mashiach's here in terms of how we're acting and treating each other as the Jewish people. So I hope that, as us as Jewish women, as we're building our homes, as we're building our communities, we are really the builders of our homes, in this upcoming week's Parsha, right? Parshas Balak. What does Balak say to the Jewish people? how goodly are your tents, O Yaakov, Jacob in English. And something I remember I was learning today in Ohel Rachel, if you know that sefer, which is a very good sefer on like women, Shalom Bais. It's mainly in Hebrew, but I do a shir on it in English. And basically, why do we call it Beit Yaakov, right? Why is it like, why are we saying like the Bait? Like, why are women referred to as that? When you think about it, all these men are going and they're learning Torah, right? And then they're coming home and they're going, oh my gosh, looking at their tent, like everything's draped. We need to like, kind of make the whole house mesudar. And the women say, okay, let's put it into action. So ladies, I hope that we're not just able to just learn here and like gain information, right? We don't want to take this information here and just kind of take it as a cerebral thing to know, but really take it and act on it and really learn how to refine ourselves in order to give to other people. So I didn't know if either of you had any questions before my husband kind of goes into the chapter on in a way you probably didn't learn in any
Chapter what?
the chapter. So he's going to start on chapter 3 in this of giving, right? And I think we do have these here, but I think we need to talk to the Rebbe about giving out to any women here, but really going into what that means tangibly. Like, okay, that sounds like so great, but like, what do you actually do with that, right? Like, it's great to have chizuk, it's great to have that insight, but how do we make it practical? Is also extremely important. So I didn't know if either of you had any questions. We're also getting kind of close to 9:30, and I just want to be respectful.
We started a little bit late too, but yeah,
right.
Into respect to your time.
Right. So if you guys like have to go, like we totally understand, especially if your husband's home with kids, or maybe you're like, no, he's home. Like,
yeah,
no,
that's okay.
Okay, no worries.
I'll let you know when I have to.
Okay, no worries. But yeah, my husband is just going to start a little bit more on because oftentimes we hear this, right? Love another as you would love yourself. But what does that actually mean? Like, that sounds so nice, but like, what does that mean? So I think if you guys don't have any questions before my husband begins. Okay. What?
A good transition.
Why are you starting on chapter 3?
So every essay is really an entity in itself. This book itself, this English translation, is only 4 out of the 12 essays. There is Matan Torah's 4 out of the 12. So the 4 that the translator, Arya Siegel, who's been a student of Rabbi Gottlieb for 20 years, chose out of the rabbi's recommendation are the main ones of the group. And generally speaking, this is the beginning of the hashkafic basis. The first 2 essays are a good lead-in, but we kind of spoke about it very briefly leading into it. It's Bekitzer, talking about why it's important to now learn this in this generation, and also the notion of for every 1 you conceal, 2 you conceal. And that's talking about the notion of that really, despite the great wisdom that's been revealed, it's really just the tip of the iceberg, and everything else is going to be even more so as time continues. B'sat Hashem, as we unveil great levels of consciousness with Mashiach and whatnot. So it's a good question.
Good.
So when we got married, under a chuppah, which was a couple feet away from here, there's a barzel. There's like a big metal platform right outside this base midrash, which is where the cheder is now. And it was totally empty, so she really liked that. So the chuppah was there, and right before I stepped on the glass, Rabbi Gottlieb said that every generation that the Beit HaMikdash is not built is as if we destroyed it in this generation. We understand that we destroyed it due to sinas chinam, due to lashon hara. So under the notion that baseless hatred is continuously, even in this moment, causing our destruction, the way to make a tikkun for that is baseless love. So he gave us a bracha that we should have baseless love. So as a preface, there's 4 levels of spiritual consciousness that the Baal HaSulam articulated. These 4 levels are keneged. They're corresponding to actually Yud Ke Vav Ke. Because we say that Yud Ke Vav Ke is the DNA of all of reality. And in terms of what we achieve as we reach the state of loving the other, is delineated as such. The bottom hay, the last hay, is receiving in order to receive. Pure ego. I want to eat this bacon cheeseburger just because I want to eat it. There's no one else involved. Just want to serve myself. Really, this is the level of chinuch. This is the level that the children are born in. Receiving to receive. Kids just want pleasure. We want to enjoy. The next level is giving in order to receive. That's the Vav. That's more so chinuch actualized, because we tell our kids that it's good to give, it's good to do ma'asim tovim, it's good to be involved in mitzvahs, so on and so forth. So as we're involved in the mitzvahs, we understand that hopefully, as Chazal tell us, the Torah was given us to refine us. Hashem gave us lots of Torah and mitzvot in order that we should have zchut. The Baal HaSulam says in Petichat, l'chokmat Kabbalah, which is an introduction to all of his Seder of Kabbalah. It's a condensed version of the Eitz Chaim in 2 volumes. And he says in the very first section, very first paragraph of the entire Sefer, he quotes Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha, who says, Kodesh Baruch Hu gave Klal Yisrael a lot of suchut in order that they should be refined. Suchut comes from the lashon of hizdochachut, of actually to purify. So normally we might think of zchut, of merit, as reward in this world or the next world. But the Baal HaSulam is telling us that zchut, the greatest merit that we can ask for, is to be refined. What is the refinement that we're looking for? Refinement from our coarseness, refinement from our selfishness, refinement from our ego. As we refine through Torah and mitzvot, which is the means to correct ourselves, we slowly but surely raise in our ability to give and be more altruistic, which is the Creator's one and only quality. We don't say that the Creator receives in himself. Chas v'shalom. He's only giving. He's only mashpia. So we're trying to get there. Kodesh Baruch Hu is love. We're trying to love too. The first hay, as I'm going up here, is giving to give. That's already pure ruchnias. That's holiness. That's what we refer to as a tzaddik or tzaddiket. Giving to give doesn't mean that someone doesn't have the desire to receive. The truth is, that's our chomer. That's our raw material. We are the creation. Kodesh Baruch Hu is only giving. So by definition, our distinction and being apart from him is that we receive from him. For good reason. As my wife said, we want to receive his infinite shef, and he wants to give us all the shef. He wants to give us all the goodness. And so we're trying to refine ourselves in order to receive that goodness appropriately. Because it could be that we can receive in order to receive for ourselves, like the bottom level, as opposed to giving altruistically. But even that level is not a full level. That's not a tzaddik gamor. Tzaddik gamor is akin to the Yud, Hashem's name. That's the highest level. The first hay, giving to give, is the tikkun of creation. As the Rebbe said, the correction for sinas chinam is baseless love. So giving to give is that correction. Receiving in order to give is actually the highest level, but that is the future. That's our idea of olam haba. That's our idea of the life to come. How?
Wait, I'm sorry. You said the Vav is the receiving in order to give. No, that's the you.
The last hay, so I'm working backwards,
Right.
is receiving to receive. The Vav is giving, but it's still in order to receive. Meaning, I'm giving someone a gift, but I still have my own intention in mind. I want to have schar, I want to get my mitzvah points. I have my own intention behind the action.
Giving in order to receive. Right?
Yes.
And the second hay is
The second hay, which is really the first hay after the yud, is giving to give. Pure giving, altruism. But even then, you still have the desire to receive. The point is that you're just not using it. Like tzaddikim, the stories like the Baal Shem Tov, he never went to sleep with a penny to his pocket. Anything he received just went out, pure giving. But the highest level, takes some meditating on, is receiving in order to give. A mashal I like to use is the Shabbos table. Someone comes to someone and they're a guest, and they're eating the host's food, and they say, wow, that is delicious. The receiving end is receiving the food in order to give goodness to the host. The host wants to give to the guest. So even though the guest is receiving the food, the guest is actually turning into the mashpia. The guest is actually turning into the giver, and the host is on the receiving end. So too with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Our entire life is just that. We're at the table of Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we want to receive His shefa. We want to receive this infinite banquet of goodness, but we have to receive it in a refined state. And the time to come, this idea of Olam Haba is just that. We're so refined, meaning we've elevated all of our desires to receive, that any time one receives, from the smallest of pleasures to the greatest of them, let's say the revelation of Hashem Himself, is in order to give goodness and to give nachat ruach to the Creator. Questions on that?
It's also a very big concept to kind of wrap, like,
Yeah.
right.
So Hashem doesn't need to receive from us. So we're receiving in order to give. That's the yud. You didn't specify that that's yud. So it wasn't sure.
Yes.
So
Right.
that's the highest level.
Yes.
But at the same time, we have in mind that Hashem doesn't need to receive from us.
The Baal HaSulam says it's a pele. This is something supernal that's beyond understanding. The question is a good one. We all have asked it, but we're trying to dig into the machshava of the Borei, and we can't.
Why do we ask them? Why do we?
It's for us.
I don't know.
It kind of goes into the idea, right, of like Hashem still gets like a nachas from us. Like Hashem isn't dependent on his existence isn't dependent on his receiving, but Hashem does have wants. He wants to be close to us. He wants us to have a relationship with him. So the receiving that he gets is more, I guess in human terms we'd call it like nachas, right? And that we want to give Hashem nachas. Because, you know, we might see our children or other people who give us so much nachas. Hashem feels the same way about us. So he might not need to receive anything from us for his existence, right? Hashem doesn't need me to tell him that he's great, for Hashem to be great. But he still wants me to say it because it has a want. Even though it doesn't affect, he doesn't have a need for it, he has a want for it, if that makes sense.
The Baal HaSulam clarifies that,
Yeah.
yes. He says that the same way a parent wants their child to go in their way, we want our children to be in Torah and mitzvot. We want them to emulate us in a way, at the very least, be happy Yidden. So too, a Kodesh Baruch Hu has this type of character, meaning we're all his children, and it gives him nachas that we're following his way. It gives him nachas that we're following Torah and mitzvot and trying to have the vekas by being like him. The language of the Baal HaSulam is that the vekas means similarity of form. If you're similar to a Kodesh Baruch Hu in character, then you're close to him. Similarity in spirituality is a matter of character. It's not a matter of space house for shalom.
Do you have another question?
I think I need to let it, like,
Right.
sit, you know, process.
It's okay. After our first date, my husband was telling me about all this like Kabbalistic stuff. I went to my Rav the next day being like, oh my gosh, is this a cult? Is this legitimate? Like, what's going on? My Rav was like, no, it's totally great. My Rav from seminary actually learns Matan Torah himself. So like, he's like, no, it's totally kosher, totally fine. It's just more of such a hard concept to just permeate. And it's okay to just, you know, let it kind of permeate, soak in. Also, too, I think it'd be helpful too. I kind of like drew out a little grid here that Bezrat Hashem, Bli Neder, I can type up for you ladies, and then like kind of type it out to give a little like a little booster like between classes, so that it's
That's
like
nice.
good to review. Because because I think sometimes too, right? Like seeing text like this can be a little difficult, but in like a grid, it's nicely organized. Maybe throw a little color into it, makes it a little bit more palatable. So I was just thinking of that, like Hashem just put that into my mind now. Like, oh, why don't I make
Good
a
idea.
chart? I like making charts, so it's fun. But yeah, no, I think that a lot of educational diagrammatic is that a word? I don't know.
Sounds good.
Diagrammatic models really help to kind of clarify this. As I like to say, a lot of the work of Pneumius Torah is like a science of how to love others, and sometimes it's like very technical. And I feel like my husband's talking about the periodic table of Judaism, like in terms of the deep aspects of learning. I think it's also good to mention too that the levels that we're saying here, I think it's important to kind of solidify from the beginning of learning about these levels of receiving in order to receive, giving in order to receive, etc. All these different levels, as while we're using the language of higher and lower, it's not the same. There are times where like something can be in the level of receiving in order to receive, but that's where it needs to be. So it's not this idea of like, oh, it's bad to be here and good to be there. Like, kind of have to separate that concept of, okay, these are the levels, and the highest level is receiving in order to give, but not thinking of it as assigning a moral value to it. Because also too, like, just even within ourselves, like most people in the world are in the level of receiving to receive. Like, just to be very, very clear, like I'm still working on that level of receiving in order to receive, right? But it doesn't mean that like you're a bad person. It's like, just get rid of the idea of like it's good and bad. It's higher and lower, just depending on its relationship to Yud Ke Vav Ke. But it's not like the,
higher, lower in importance, because
right.
generally we say that giving is more important than receiving, because giving is the quality of the creator. The wonder, the pele of the highest level is that the receiving is giving, so it's both at the same time. It's a wondrous thing that's beyond nature by definition. It's 100% receiving and 100% giving.
Right, and in general,
takes learning and meditating on.
Right, and in general too, I think that a lot of this, we have to remember that we're finite beings connecting to an infinite system of Hashem. So sometimes the pella of it is just, we're never going to fully understand it, but we're neither obligated to complete the work nor to desist from it, as Hillel the Elder says. So
Very nice.
I think it's important to just kind of keep going with this, because sometimes it can be a lot to kind of wrap your brain around, but it's like very good work, and just that good inner work. Did you want to read more inside?
Sure. Let's read the text. Let's look inside. So the very top here is the thing with the line on the side, like my wife said in the beginning. That's the Baal HaSulam. The comments in between with the numbers, that's the commentary by Rabbi Gottlieb. So the Baal HaSulam begins in quotes, and love your fellow as yourself, from Vayikra. Rabbi Akiva says, this is a general principle of the Torah. So you have bullet points here that's added by the translator. Love the other as yourself. This is all of the Torah. How does this principle include mitzvah regarding our relationship with God? The Baal HaSulam begins. The statement of our sages cries out for explanation. For the expression of general principle, in Hebrew klal, implies a number of particulars that come together to make up the general principle. Rabbi Gottlieb says on this, the Hebrew word klal is ambiguous. It can mean a principle, or it can refer to the entirety of something. For example, the expression klal Yisrael refers to all the people of Israel. The Baal HaSulam continues, thus when Rabbi Akiva says that the commandment of love your fellow as yourself is a great principle of the Torah, what he means is that the remaining 612 mitzvot of the Torah, together with all its verses, are no more than, nor any less than, any of the particulars that are included and assimilated within the single commandment of, and love your fellow as yourself. Margalit says here, the single goal of all of the Torah is to develop in us the character of loving the other. This includes the mitzvah to love the other as yourself, and the other 612 mitzvot as well. And even all the verses in the Torah that contain stories which are not connected to the performing of mitzvot. Every single detail, every minutia is to lead us to this ultimate point, because the vekas again is characteristic. We're trying to get to the point of loving the other. So I love gematria. I'm a big fan of doing gematrias and figuring things out. My dad's a math teacher. I'm sure there's something in my brain regarding that. So it's very inspiring to me to contemplate the notion of echad and ahava. Echad,
Cloud and
Echad.
and ahava. Echad and ahava are both gematria 13. So it's telling us that there's an intimate connection between oneness and love. We say Hashem echad, Hashem is one. The Baal HaSulam says that what does it mean that Hashem is one? It means his desire is one. He's unchanging. We say Hashem is simple. Hashem is the ultimate pashut. He's pashtus. He just is. And it's love. Also, if you add 13 and 13 together, you get 26, which is the gematria of Shem Havaya, of Yud Ke Vav Ke. I went a little deeper. There's a method in gematria called atbash, where every letter also has an opposite corresponding gematria. It's called atbash like this. For example, aleph is to tav. So normally when the gematria of aleph is 1, the method of atbash really it's 400. Because tav is 400. So to bet, which is 2, is actually shin, which is 300. So it works backwards like this. Hence atbash, aleph tav, bet shin. The atbash of echad is 560. The atbash of ahava is 880. If you add these two together, you get 1,440. There's a principle in gematria called revolving wheel. There's a pasuk in Devarim and Parshas Hazinu. It's in 32:30. I'm paraphrasing it. For how could one pursue 1,000? And the secret of that verse is to teach us that in gematria, when you have numbers that are in the thousands, you can convert the 1,000 into 1. So if it's 2,000 something, the 2,000 turns into 2, so on and so forth. So the revolving wheel method, 1440 turns into 441. Because the 1,000 turns into a 1. 441 is the gematria of emet. The Shema ends in the 6 words with echad. The first word in the actual paragraphs of Shema is v'ahavta, referring to ahava. And the last word of the Shema is also emet. Meaning to say that the truth is embedded in us reaching the state of love. And reaching that state of love is in essence being one with Hashem because we're equivalent to his characteristic. And he in himself is just love. David HaMelech also said that only kindness pursued me. Even when he's being chased to death, he understood that it was Hashem's chesed. Why we should get to such a level, but meaning to say that, to understand that everything is just chesed and love. And sometimes it's above our das, it's above our understanding. And that's what we call, at least in Ashlag terminology, Muna. Muna is to be above our understanding. But Hashem, by definition, is above our understanding. So to connect to Hashem, by going above our understanding, when, let's say, darkness is pursuing us, but we call it kindness, that's how we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. because it's a similar quality. Both are above our understanding. Tov. What's that? Thank you. So the Baal HaSulam continues, just to finish up here. It's just surely a surprising statement, because although it might be justified in the case of those mitzvot regarding interpersonal relations, how can the commandment of, and love your fellow as yourself, include and support within it all the mitzvot between people and God, which are the essential principles of the Torah and the majority of its makeup? So Margalit says, it makes sense that the interpersonal mitzvot, with all their particulars, such as do not avenge, do not bear a grudge, do not disregard a lost object that can be returned, do not steal, etc., all weave together one common thread. That common thread is the training to acquire a different nature, the nature to be considerate of the other and to truly acknowledge his or her existence. These interpersonal mitzvot create the desire to give selflessly to the other. In plain language, they create love of the other, where loving implies perceiving in the most exaggerated manner the virtues and the significance of the other person. Just as we have high regard for our own significance, so we must recognize that each individual is a completely unique and valuable treasure. But how are the mitzvot between people and God, phylacteries being tefillin, Shabbat, sacrifices, blowing the shofar, connected to this transforming education that we are expected to undergo? Good question. Hopefully for a future class. But I'd like to note a beautiful concept by Margalit. He says in terms of the refinement and the level that we can reach and the taste that we can actually experience in Torah and mitzvot. Normally, when we're in these lower levels of consciousness, like receiving to receive or giving to receive, when we're controlled in essence by the quality of the nachash. What is the nachash? The snake is always in the ground, always eating dust, meaning whatever the snake eats, it tastes the same. So whether, let's say, for myself, whether I'm putting on tefillin or learning Torah or doing other mitzvot, it's all the same to me. But he says, as we refine ourselves, as we come to this higher state of loving the other, we should be able to taste every mitzvah, even the minutia of halacha. He said when he was a child in Israel, I imagine late 60s, early 70s, and he would go to the market, and there was one type of cheese. He said nowadays you go and there's a plethora. So how much more so? So many cheeses to choose from, so much food to choose from, so many different flavors. How much more so? Every single mitzvah, every single detail of serving Kadosh Baruch Hu should have a very sweet taste to it. And Sat Hashem, we should be able to taste it. Speeding soon.
Thank you, ladies, so much for coming. We're hoping to kind of make this like a regular weekly thing here on Sundays here at the shul. Bezrat Hashem. The one question that we have is next week is going to be right after, like around this time will be right as the fast of Tammuz is ending. So we didn't know if you guys would be okay like moving it to Monday or what your guys' thoughts are. Monday 8:30? I don't know if
I think so. Things not always so far away, but usually it will be on Sunday.
Right, it's just right after.
Just because it's Motzei Stone.
Right, and then also in a few weeks too, it'll be right after Tisha B'Av.
Right.
So I know might be a time that is very difficult for folks to come. But yeah, really want to have you guys learn more and more of. Okay, like what is love?
The problem is starts hopeless and
Yeah.
life gets little changed.
Of course. But we're just trying to, right. And we also just want to make sure that it's a time that like people can come to, which is nice about starting an English year that we can kind of control more of the
And that's
timing of
what
once
I'm
we like
saying,
kind of
it's
know
sort of
people.
like the beginning of the summer. I have orchim.
Wow.
And it's
Beautiful mitzvah. Okay, so next week we'll aim for doing it at 8:30 on Monday, and like we'll figure out if you are able to come to Zrat Hashem. But thank you ladies so much for coming. You guys can like take like snacks home too. No
Your
worries.
names again?
So I'm Margalit.
Margalit Shoshana.
Margalit
Speaking
Shoshana.
Pearly Rose.
what? Wait a second. What's your family name?
Our family name is Polinovskiy. That is always fun to say at any government office here in Israel. They're like, wait. That is a lot of letters. Like, hang on. Polinovskiy is our family name, but my first two names are Margalit Shoshana. So my husband likes to refer to me as Margalit Shoshana. My husband is Adam Yitzchak.
From Yitzchak?
Adam. Like Adam Arisha.
Adam.
Adam Yitzchak.
Adam
Yeah.
Yitzchak. Or as I like to call it, Laughing Man. Yitzchak. So
Great.
So,
Amy,
thank you
it was so
thank you
nice
so
to meet
much.
you ladies.
Pleasure.
Of course.
Thank you.
Okay.